The darkness spread across the galaxy like spilled ink on paper. One by one, the bright dots that were once thriving star systems disappeared forever. The thing that caused this horror had no name that living beings could speak. The few survivors who escaped called it the Void Devourer, though even that name felt too small for something so terrible. In the great meeting hall of the Galactic Coalition, representatives from dozens of species gathered in desperate silence. The air felt heavy with fear and hopelessness. Tall, blue-skinned Vortax stood next to the glowing energy forms of the Astari. The mechanical Caliph hummed quietly in their corner, their metal bodies reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Ambassador Thekvar of the Vortak paced nervously in front of the massive star map. Red marks showed where entire solar systems had vanished in the past month. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Devourer was moving toward the core worlds, consuming everything in its path. 17 systems lost this week alone, Thekvar announced, his telepathic voice reaching every mind in the room. Our most powerful weapons do nothing. Our fastest ships cannot outrun it. Our smartest scientists have no answers. A Caliph representative stepped forward, its mechanical voice echoing. Probability calculations show complete galactic extinction within 6 months and 12 days. All logical solutions have failed. The room fell silent again. These were the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They had mastered faster than light travel, built cities that floated in space, and created technology that could reshape planets. Yet none of it mattered now. In the back corner of the hall, a small group of humans sat quietly. Most of the other species barely noticed them. Humans were new to space travel, barely 200 years since their first crude rockets left Earth. Their technology was primitive compared to the others. Their lifespans were short. Their bodies were weak and fragile. Commander Jiho Park sat straight in his simple uniform, watching the alien representatives argue about evacuation plans and final messages to their home worlds. His dark eyes moved from speaker to speaker, taking in every word. Next to him, Dr. Mina Ko typed notes on her basic tablet computer, occasionally shaking her head at what she heard. They are giving up, she whispered to Jiho in Korean. All of them. Jiho nodded slowly. He had seen this before, though never on such a massive scale. During the worst battles of human history, there came a moment when logic said to surrender. When the numbers showed certain defeat. When smart people accepted their fate and prepared to die with dignity. But humans, Jiho knew, had never been particularly smart in that way. Thekvar suddenly turned toward the human section. His large, dark eyes focused on Jiho with something that might have been desperation. Commander Park, his telepathic voice was careful, almost embarrassed. Your species has been studying our reports on the Void Devourer. The entire hall turned to look at the humans. Jiho could feel their attention like physical weight. Some looked curious, others seemed almost amused that anyone would ask the primitive humans for advice at such a critical time. Yes, Ambassador, Jiho replied, standing slowly. His voice sounded strange after the smooth telepathic communications of the other species. We have been reading everything you shared with us. Do you have any insights? Thekvar asked. The way he said it made it clear he expected nothing useful, but had run out of other options. Dr. Mina Ko stood beside Jiho. She had spent the last month reading every report, watching every recording of the Devourer's attacks. What she found confused and frightened her, but also sparked something in her mind that she recognized as uniquely human. The entity does not just consume matter and energy, she said carefully, aware that every word was being recorded and analyzed. It feeds on something else. Something psychological. A ripple of interest moved through the gathered representatives. The Astari glowed brighter, their way of showing attention. The Caliph began recording everything. Explain, Thekvar commanded. Mina looked at her notes, then set them aside. In every attack the same pattern appears. The Devourer approaches a system slowly. The inhabitants have time to see it coming. They send out distress calls, evacuate some of their people and prepare their defenses. But as it gets closer, something changes in their communications. She paused, looking around the room. Fear turns to despair. Hope turns to acceptance. By the time it arrives, entire civilizations have already surrendered mentally. They face their end with dignity, but also with complete resignation. That is logical, a Caliph representative stated. When defeat is certain, acceptance is the rational response. Maybe, Jiho said quietly. But humans are not always rational. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Earth was far from the Devourer's current path, but if these advanced civilizations fell, humanity would face the monster alone with their primitive weapons and crude ships. What if the Devourer needs that surrender? He asked. What if it cannot consume civilizations that refuse to give up hope? The room erupted in confused discussions. The idea seemed absurd to species that prided themselves on logic and reason. How could psychological states affect a cosmic entity that consumed entire stars? But as Jiho looked at the star map, watching the red marks spread like a disease across their galaxy, he felt something stirring in his chest. It was not hope exactly, and certainly not confidence. It was something more fundamental to human nature. It was stubborn, unreasonable defiance. Dr. Mina Ko stared at the data streams flowing across her computer screen. For 3 days she had barely slept, barely eaten, barely spoken to anyone. The research lab aboard the Coalition flagship hummed with quiet energy as alien scientists worked alongside her small human team. The numbers told a story that made her stomach twist with fear and excitement. Every world the Void Devourer had consumed showed the same pattern. First came the long-range sensors detecting the approaching darkness. Then the evacuation orders and defense preparations. But always, there was a moment when the communications from those worlds changed. "Look at this," she said to her assistant, Dr. Jean Ali, pointing at the screen. Kepler Prime had 3 billion inhabitants. Their military was strong, their technology advanced. But listen to their final transmission. The recording played in the empty lab. A calm, dignified voice spoke in the Vortak language, translated by the computer into simple English. "We have done all we can. Our fate is sealed. We face the end with honor. May others remember us well." Gina frowned. "It sounds noble. Brave even." "That's exactly the problem," Mina said, switching to another recording. "Now listen to this. It's from a human colony that faced a solar flare disaster last year. They had no way to escape, no technology to stop it." A different voice filled the room. Rough, angry, desperate. "Solar flare or not, we're not going down easy. Engineering team, I don't care if it's impossible, find a way to boost the shields. Medical team, prep everyone for radiation treatment even if we don't have enough supplies. We're going to fight this thing until our last breath." The difference was obvious. Gina sat back in her chair. The human colony, they never accepted defeat. "Exactly," Mina said, her eyes bright with dangerous possibility. "And they survived. Not all of them, but enough. The solar flare should have killed everyone, but their stubborn refusal to die somehow made the difference." Captain Dongwu Lim entered the lab carrying a cup of coffee and looking tired. He had been coordinating with Earth's military, preparing evacuation plans that everyone knew would be useless. "Any good news, doctors?" Mina turned to face him, her expression serious. "Captain, I need to ask you something strange. If you were facing certain death, completely impossible odds, what would humans do?" Dongwu laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We'd probably do something stupid and stubborn." "Why?" "Because I think stupid and stubborn might be exactly what we need." She showed him the data, explaining the pattern she had discovered. The Void Devourer didn't just consume matter and energy. It fed on resignation, on the moment when a civilization accepted its fate. Every world that had fallen had surrendered mentally before the monster even arrived. "So you're saying it's like a bully?" Dongwu said slowly. "It can only hurt you if you're afraid." "More than that," Gina added, understanding dawning in her voice. "Maybe it can only consume civilizations that have given up hope." Commander Jiho Park arrived an hour later, called by urgent messages. He found the 3 humans clustered around Mina's computer, their faces showing a mixture of terror and wild excitement. "Commander," Mina said without any greeting, "we need to propose something that will sound completely insane to every logical species in the galaxy." She outlined her theory quickly. The Void Devourer was not just a cosmic predator. It was something that existed to test civilizations. Those that surrendered to despair were consumed. But what if a species refused to surrender? What if they maintained hope and defiance even when facing impossible odds? "The problem," Jiho said carefully, "is that all the advanced species are too smart to ignore reality. When they calculate the odds, logic tells them to accept defeat." "But humans don't always listen to logic," Dongwu said with a grin. "Sometimes we're too dumb to know when we're beaten." Mina nodded eagerly. "That's our advantage. We can maintain hope without logical reasons. We can fight even when we know we'll lose. We can refuse to surrender even when surrender makes perfect sense." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was audacious beyond belief. Instead of fleeing from the Void Devourer, humanity would lead an attack directly into its core. But this would not be a military assault in any traditional sense. "We turn Earth into a broadcast station," Mina explained. Every human, from children to elders, focuses their mind on the same thing. Pure stubborn refusal to give up. We project that feeling across space directly at the devourer. And then what? Jiho asked. Then we fly ships directly into it. Not to destroy it with weapons, but to serve as carriers for human determination. We show it what a species looks like that refuses to die. Gina looked worried. The volunteer pilots would be flying to certain death. Maybe, Dongwu said quietly. But maybe not. If Mina is right, if the devourer can only consume those who have surrendered, then pilots who never surrender might survive. They worked through the night refining the plan. It required Earth's entire population to participate in the largest coordinated mental effort in human history. It required volunteer pilots to fly primitive human ships directly into a cosmic horror. It required the support of alien species who valued logic above all else. When they finally presented their proposal to the Coalition Assembly the next morning, the reaction was exactly what they expected. Confused silence, then arguments about human irrationality and primitive thinking. But as the debate continued and more star systems disappeared from the galaxy map, even the most logical species began to consider the impossible. Sometimes, when logic and advanced technology had failed completely, madness was the only option left. The warning sirens echoed across Earth as the Void Devourer entered the outer edge of the solar system. Every human alive could see it through their telescopes and screens, a massive darkness that seemed to eat the stars themselves. But instead of panic, something extraordinary was happening on the blue planet. In schools around the world, children sat in circles holding hands. Their teachers had explained the plan in simple words. We need to think very hard about not giving up, they said. Think about your favorite superhero. Think about how they never quit, even when the monster is bigger and stronger. 8-year-old Sujin Kim sat in her classroom in Seoul, squeezing her friend's hand tight. She thought about her favorite cartoon character, a small robot that always said, "I can do it," even when facing giant enemies. Sujin whispered those words to herself over and over. In hospitals, elderly patients who could barely speak focused their minds on memories of surviving hard times. Wars, famines, disasters, they had lived through them all by simply refusing to give up. Now their stubbornness would serve humanity one last time. Lieutenant Hannah Shin checked her fighter spacecraft one final time. Her ship was covered in drawings and messages that children from around the world had sent to the volunteer pilots. Crayon pictures of stick figures fighting monsters. Handwritten notes saying, "You can do it," and "Don't give up," in dozens of languages. The messages made her smile, even though she knew she was probably flying to her death. Her ship's computer was not advanced like alien technology. Her weapons were simple compared to Coalition standards. But her heart was filled with something the advanced species had forgotten how to feel: joy in the face of impossible challenges. Colonel Taemin Choi's voice crackled over the communication system to the 1,000 volunteer pilots preparing to launch. Remember, we're not trying to destroy this thing with our weapons. We're trying to show it what humans look like when we refuse to die. Broadcast everything: your memories, your feelings, your stubborn refusal to surrender. On the Coalition flagship, alien representatives watched in amazement as Earth's primitive spacecraft launched toward certain destruction. The ships were slow, their armor weak, their weapons laughably outdated. Yet the pilots inside them sang songs, told jokes, and shared stories as they flew into the approaching darkness. Sergeant Bo Young piloted his fighter directly toward the Devourer's writhing tentacles. His ship's radio was open to all frequencies, broadcasting his voice across space. "My little sister drew me a picture of a superhero," he said, his voice calm and happy. "She said that superhero is me. I promised her I would save the world, so that's what I'm going to do." The Void Devourer had consumed thousands of worlds, but it had never encountered anything like this. Usually, when it approached a planet, the inhabitants sent out desperate calls for help. They evacuated their people with sad dignity. They prepared to die with honor and acceptance. But these humans were doing something completely different. They were flying toward it with celebration in their hearts. They were broadcasting not fear or resignation, but fierce joy and unbreakable determination. Dr. Mina co-monitored the psychic resonance patterns from the command center. Her instruments showed something incredible happening. The Devourer's approach had slowed. For the first time in recorded history, the cosmic entity seemed confused. "It's working," she whispered to Commander Jiho Park. "The readings show the Devourer is experiencing something it has never felt before." On the communication channels, the human pilots continued their broadcasts. Some told stories about their families. Others shared jokes that made no sense but brought laughter. A few sang old songs from Earth, their voices carrying across the darkness of space. Lieutenant Hannah Shin's fighter was the first to make contact with the Devourer's outer tendrils. The dark energy wrapped around her ship, but instead of screaming in fear, she laughed. "You think this is scary?" she broadcast. "I grew up with 3 older brothers who put spiders in my bed. This is nothing." Her joy seemed to burn the darkness like sunlight. Other pilots followed her example, diving their ships directly into the Devourer's mass. Each one carried messages from Earth's children, memories of love and hope, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The alien coalition species watched in shock as something unprecedented began to happen. The Vortak, inspired by human courage, started projecting their own memories of beauty instead of fear. The glowing Astari shared their light songs of celebration rather than mourning. Even the logical Caliph began broadcasting mathematical equations about hope and possibility. Throughout Earth's solar system, the psychic network grew stronger. Every human mind focused on the same impossible idea, that monsters could be defeated, that darkness could be conquered, that giving up was simply not an option. The Void Devourer shuddered as waves of pure human stubbornness washed over it. This species was unlike anything it had encountered in millions of years. Instead of becoming weaker when faced with annihilation, they seemed to grow stronger. Instead of accepting logical defeat, they celebrated their defiance. Colonel Taemin Choi's ship disappeared into the Devourer's core, his final transmission echoing across the galaxy. "See you on the other side, everyone. Save some cake for me at the victory party." As more human ships vanished into the darkness, something extraordinary began to happen. The Devourer itself was changing, learning, remembering something it had forgotten long ago. The real battle was just beginning. The Void Devourer stopped moving for the first time in a million years. Deep within its cosmic consciousness, something stirred that it had not felt since the beginning of time. The human ships that had flown into its darkness were not being consumed like all the others. Instead, they burned like tiny stars inside its vast form, each one broadcasting something the entity had never tasted before. Dr. Mina Ko stared at her instruments in disbelief. "The energy readings are completely wrong," she said to Commander Jiho Park. "The Devourer should have absorbed those ships instantly, but they're still there. They're still transmitting." From somewhere inside the cosmic horror, Lieutenant Hannah Shin's voice crackled over the radio. "Still here, Command? It's dark and scary, but I'm thinking about my grandmother's soup recipe. Somehow that makes it less frightening." Other voices joined hers. Sergeant Bo Young-on was reciting a poem his daughter had written about butterflies. Colonel Taemin Choi was humming an old folk song his mother used to sing. Each human pilot, faced with the ultimate darkness, had chosen to focus on memories of light and love. The alien coalition representatives gathered around the communication equipment, listening in amazement. These humans had flown directly into certain death, yet they were still alive, still talking, still refusing to surrender. Ambassador Thekvar's telepathic voice trembled with something that might have been awe. "This is impossible. The Devourer has consumed entire civilizations in seconds. How are they surviving inside it?" Commander Jiho Park listened to his pilots' voices and felt something growing in his chest. "Pride maybe. Or hope. Because they never stopped believing they could win," he said simply. On Earth, the psychic broadcast continued. In a small apartment in Seoul, elderly Mrs. Park sat in her wheelchair, focusing her mind on the memory of her wedding day 70 years ago. She had been so happy then, so full of hope for the future. She pushed that feeling outward, toward the stars, toward the darkness that threatened her world. In a playground in New York, children played games while concentrating on their favorite stories. Tales of heroes who saved the day, of underdogs who won impossible victories, of good defeating evil through courage and friendship. Their pure belief in happy endings created waves of power that reached across space. The Void Devourer began to experience something it had never felt before: confusion. For eons, it had existed as a cosmic force of ending, consuming civilizations that had accepted their fate. But these humans refused to accept anything. Even while being digested by a primordial entity, they maintained their stubborn hope. Inside its dark form, Sergeant Bo Young-on's ship suddenly blazed with brilliant light. His final transmission before disappearing had been simple: "I promised my daughter I would come home. Promises matter more than physics." That promise, that absolute refusal to break faith with a child, created something the Devourer had never encountered. The darkness around Bo Young's ship began to change, becoming less empty, more alive. Dr. Mina Ko's instruments went crazy as energy patterns shifted throughout the cosmic entity. "It's learning from them," she breathed in wonder. The Devourer is actually learning what hope feels like. More human ships dove into the entity's form. Captain Minho Lee broadcast his wedding vows as his fighter vanished into darkness. Pilot Na-young Seo shared the story of how she learned to walk again after losing her legs in an accident. Each personal triumph, each small victory over despair, added to the growing light inside the Devourer. The other alien species, watching this impossible battle, began to understand something profound. Their advanced logic had always told them to accept defeat when the odds were impossible. But humans had a different approach. They changed the odds by refusing to believe in them. Slowly, carefully, the Vortak began to project their own memories of overcoming hardship. The Astari shared their songs of celebration from festivals long ago. The Caliph, despite their mechanical nature, transmitted records of their creators' dreams and hopes. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath as billions of minds focused on a single concept, that endings could become beginnings, that darkness could transform into light, that even cosmic entities could learn to hope. Inside the Void Devourer, something unprecedented was happening. The entity that had spent eternity consuming civilizations was remembering its own origins. Long ago, before it became a force of destruction, it had been something else. Something that created instead of destroyed. Something that nurtured instead of consumed. Lieutenant Hannah Shin's voice echoed from deep within the darkness, now sounding strangely peaceful. "I can see something beautiful in here," she transmitted. "It's like seeds waiting to grow. The monster isn't really a monster. It just forgot how to be something else." The Devourer shuddered as waves of human determination continued to wash through its consciousness. These small, primitive beings were teaching it something that all their advanced technology and logic could not, that hope was not just an emotion, but a force that could reshape reality itself. On Earth, 8-year-old Sujin Kim sat in her classroom, holding her friend's hand tight. She whispered the words that would change everything. "Monsters are just scared things that forgot how to be happy. Maybe we can help it remember." Those simple words, spoken by a child who believed in happy endings, reached the very core of the cosmic entity. And for the first time in a million years, the Void Devourer began to remember what it meant to hope. The moment Sujin Kim spoke her gentle words about helping monsters remember happiness, something extraordinary happened across the entire galaxy. The 8-year-old girl sat in her soul classroom, still holding her friend's hand, completely unaware that her simple observation had just reached the consciousness of the most powerful entity in the universe. The Void Devourer stopped completely. For the first time since the beginning of recorded history, the cosmic entity ceased its endless consumption and truly listened. Inside its vast darkness, the voices of human pilots continued to broadcast their stubborn hope, their memories of love, their absolute refusal to surrender. But now there was something new: compassion. Lieutenant Hannah Shin, still somehow alive deep within the entity's form, felt the change immediately. The crushing darkness around her ship began to shift and warm. "Command," she transmitted, her voice filled with wonder. "Something incredible is happening in here. The darkness is changing color. It's becoming something beautiful." Dr. Mina Ko watched her instruments with tears in her eyes as energy readings transformed before her. The destructive patterns that had marked the Devourer's approach were shifting into something completely different. Creation patterns. Life patterns. Hope patterns. Commander Jiho Park stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, listening to transmissions from inside the entity. His pilots were not dying. They were becoming part of something larger, something that was learning to build instead of destroy. The Void Devourer began to speak for the first time in millions of years. Its voice was not the terrible roar that civilizations had expected, but something soft and wondering, like a child discovering color for the first time. "I remember now," the entity whispered across space, its words reaching every mind in the galaxy. "Long ago, before the hunger, before the emptiness, I was a gardener of stars. I planted light in dark places. I nurtured worlds where life could grow." On Earth, Sujin Kim felt the gentle voice in her head and smiled. She had been right. The monster was just scared and lonely, like the sad creature in her favorite storybook who became kind when someone showed it friendship. "What changed you?" Commander Jiho Park asked, speaking for all the species of the galaxy. The entity's response came with waves of ancient memory. Civilizations arose and fell. Each time they faced their end, they surrendered with such beautiful dignity, such noble acceptance. "I thought this was what intelligent life was supposed to do, face death with grace and peace. So I became death, giving them what I thought they wanted." Sergeant Bo Young-on's voice crackled from somewhere within the transformed entity. "But humans don't do that, do we? We fight until the last second even when we know we can't win. Yes, the entity replied, its voice growing stronger and more joyful. You showed me something I had forgotten. Life is not supposed to surrender. Life is supposed to struggle, to hope, to refuse the ending. You taught me that the purpose of intelligence is not to accept fate, but to change it. Throughout the galaxy, something miraculous began to happen. The empty spaces where star systems had been consumed started to shimmer with new light. The entity that had spent eons destroying was now creating, planting seeds of new stars and worlds in the darkness it had left behind. The human pilots inside the Devourer found themselves not consumed, but transformed. They became living sparks of hope within the entity's vast consciousness, helping guide its transformation from destroyer to creator. Their ships merged with cosmic forces, becoming something between technology and magic. Captain Minho Lee's voice echoed across space with laughter. I think I understand now. We're not dying, we're becoming part of something wonderful. We're helping birth new worlds. On Earth, the psychic broadcast continued, but now it carried a different message. Instead of desperate defiance, humanity projected pure joy and celebration. Children drew pictures of new planets filled with flowers and friendly aliens. Elderly people shared stories of renewal and second chances. Dr. Mina Ko watched through her telescopes as the first new star ignited in what had been empty space just hours before. It's working, she whispered. The Devourer is becoming a creator. Our people inside it are helping it remember how to build instead of destroy. The alien species throughout the galaxy experienced their own transformation. The logical Vortak began to dream again for the first time in centuries. The energy-based Astari sang new songs of possibility. The mechanical Caliph started designing blueprints for hope itself. Ambassador Thekvar approached Commander Jiho Park with something that might have been reverence. Your species has done something impossible, the alien said. You have taught a cosmic force to hope. How do we thank you for saving not just our lives, but the very concept of life itself? Jiho Park looked out at the new stars being born in the darkness and smiled. You don't thank us. You help us. We're all part of this now, humans, aliens, even cosmic entities. We're all learning to hope together. The transformed Devourer began to move through the galaxy again, but now its purpose was completely changed. Where it had once consumed, it now planted. Where it had brought endings, it now created beginnings. The human pilots within it served as guides and teachers, showing the ancient entity how to nurture instead of destroy. Sujin Kim looked up at the night sky through her classroom window and saw new stars twinkling where there had been only darkness before. She squeezed her friend's hand and whispered, See? Sometimes the scariest monsters just need someone to be their friend. The galaxy would never be the same. Hope had triumphed over logic, compassion had conquered fear, and humanity had proven that sometimes the most primitive response, refusing to give up, was exactly what the universe needed. The dawn after darkness had finally begun.